Good evening, everyone. We are so thrilled to have you with us this evening for the webinar tonight, which is going to show you how to fill out the FAFSA. I'm Kathy Hastings McDonald, Associate Director for Outreach with the North Carolina State Education Assistance Authority. We are the state agency that helps North Carolina pay for education. Next slide, please. Now, first, let's get a sense of who is joining us this evening. So I am going to go ahead and launch a little poll so that you all can tell us who's joining us. So if you can just click on the poll, a student, a parent, a school counselor, a community-based nonprofit, or other. And if you're an other person, go ahead and put in the question box who you are. We'd love to know where you're calling in from. Let's give you all a couple of seconds to vote here. Give that a couple more seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and close that out and share results with you all. So we have lots of parents on the call tonight. We are super excited that you're here. Lots of great information to share with you in terms of helping your student prepare for college. And for those 21% that are students, we're thrilled that you're here too. This is one of the most important steps you can take in the college going process. So thanks for joining us today. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Now I'm going to share a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. First, we have financial aid advisors ready to answer your questions, so please feel free to put those in the question box in your dashboard. If you aren't currently seeing a dashboard on your screen, just click on the little orange box with the arrow in it. That will open up your dashboard. You should see something that says questions with a little triangle next to that. Click on that and that'll open up the question box. We have wonderful folks working behind the scenes tonight. Many thanks to Maggie Brostick, Holly Kelly, April Query, Juana Hernandez Lira, and Catherine Marker, who are helping us answer your questions. You can put those in the box at any time, so don't feel like you need to wait until the end. Those folks are waiting to answer your questions because we know there's a lot of sometimes picky things that happen with FAFSA, and you want to get those questions answered as quickly as possible. Second, we will be recording the session and sharing it out on the CFNC YouTube channel afterwards. So in case later on when you're filling out the FAFSA, if you want to pull it up and play it and pause it and rewind as you're filling out your own FAFSA, we will absolutely make that available to you. And third, want to make sure you know that there's some handouts that we've put in the handout section of your dashboard. If you aren't seeing those, don't worry, we will send those out later. But I've included the slides from tonight in case you want to refer back to those. I have a handout for students with parents who do not have a social security number. We also have a handout on which parent to include in filling out the FAFSA, and the fourth handout is on determining if a student could be considered as dependent or independent with regards to the FAFSA. So those resources are there in case you want to look at those while we're going along. If any of you are Spanish-speaking families and you would prefer to ask questions in Spanish, you can enter those into the question box. Our team is ready to answer those questions as well, so no worries there. Okay, so to get us started tonight, for those of you who might not be familiar with the FAFSA, it stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It is one of the best ways to make college more affordable. FAFSA unlocks access to financial aid at the federal, state, and the college level for students who qualify. It's one of the best ways, and one of the best ways for you to find out if you qualify is to complete a FAFSA, which is why you're all here. Now, 4 out of 5 college students rely on some combination of financial aid to go to college, which means the vast majority of students do. So we're glad you're here, that you're to learn more about how to take this important step. Filling out the FAFSA allows you to be considered for several forms of aid, scholarships and grants. That's money that does not need to be paid back, so that's our favorite kind. Work study, which allows students to earn while they learn, and loans, which that is money that will need to be paid back. So you want students to only be taking out what they need here. Now, to help you fill out the form tonight, I am thrilled to welcome Lauren Trethaway, who's Assistant Director for Student Financial Aid at Wake Forest University. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Lauren. Lauren, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to start with a little level setting of this presentation and what you can expect today. As mentioned, we are going to be walking through the FAFSA screen by screen. We'll look at the FSA ID, the output you'll receive, but we're not going to go into too much detail of how financial aid works at any specific college financial aid program or a review of your special circumstances. However, we've got some great resources to hopefully help you navigate some of those at the bottom category. Here's a brief overview, what to expect. I'm going to go through the FAFSA and what it looks like when you log in, the dependent student with parental data view, your student aid report, some corrections, and special circumstances. So this presentation is also from Federal Student Aid, and I modified it a little bit for this presentation tonight, but here are a few updates for the 2023-24 FAFSA, which we'll be talking about today. These are screenshots and will look like a majority. However, you may not have to answer all the questions we're going to go over tonight, but this presentation does show all the questions that you could have to answer. And hopefully everybody knows the FAFSA is already available as of October 1st. So if you're just really eager after this presentation tonight, this weekend you can go fill it out and you'll feel really prepared. Here are some of the key features of filling it out online. Using the IRS data retrieval tool is really popular, where you can transfer the tax data from the IRS into your FAFSA. There's also a way for parents that have multiple students to populate their information from another student's FAFSA that they already completed, which is a great time saver as well. And you can make corrections once it's processed. If you maybe knew a little bit about the FAFSA before, you may see some things that look different this year. Here are the major changes. They've removed the selective service question, the drug conviction question, and they have added a demographic survey at the end, which you just won't see the first two, but you will see that demographic survey as we're going through our walkthrough. So when you're getting ready to start your FAFSA, you're going to start off at studentaid.gov home page. You can also type fafsa.gov and it'll take you there. It's really important that you're going to a .gov address. There are, unfortunately, some sites out there that are not actually the government. So you want to make sure that you're going to this page and we're not paying for completing our FAFSA. To navigate to the FAFSA from the home page, at the top left bar, you'll see the FAFSA form, and then you'll select Complete the FAFSA. So here's what the landing page looks like. You've got two sections, whether you're new to the FAFSA process or a returning user. So for the purpose of this presentation, we will start with the new to FAFSA just to kind of get the full extent of what to expect. And then you're going to get to this role selection page where you can then select if you're the student accessing the FAFSA or the parent. The last one is a preparer. There are some cases where people may use preparers to fill out the FAFSA, but the most common is definitely the student or the parent. So for this presentation, we're going to say we're the student. And you have the ability to either log in with personal identifiers or to create an FSA ID. So this is what you would have to enter to log into the FAFSA: your name, date of birth, and your social security number. I do want to make sure that I point out the importance of getting the social security number correct right here. As you're filling out the FAFSA, this is the only data element that you're not able to edit once you submit it. Once you've entered it and you've moved on, that's locked in, and you would have to do a whole new FAFSA if this was incorrect. So it's just really important that you get your social security number correct when you're filling this out. If you already created your FSA ID, this is what the screen would look like. The FSA ID is your electronic signature that you will use to sign your FAFSA. The student will have one and the parent will have a separate one. So you would enter this here. And it's going to take you to the Get Started page. As you can see at the bottom, there are two options. There's a 2023-24 and the current year, which is 22-23. We want to pick the 23-24 FAFSA. To start, you do have to create a save key, which is a temporary password up to 8 characters in case you weren't able to submit the application in full in the one session. Once you've created that, it's going to have this page that has any and all questions you might have along the way. You don't have to open any of these. You can just hit continue. But it is a great resource if you're kind of unsure, and it can ease your mind. We're going to navigate this FAFSA with dependent student with parental data. There, of course, could be circumstances where the student is an independent student, and I'll explain a little bit how that look might vary later on in the presentation. So it starts with the personal information for the student. Once you've already entered your FSID or your personal information, this data is going to carry over into the FAFSA. So you just want to verify that all this is correct, and you have the option to add your middle initial. If you notice at the top too, it says your social security number, your first name. Anytime it's referring to you or your is going to be for the student. So this is especially important if the parent is the one driving the FAFSA application and completing it on behalf and with the student, is to not enter their information when it says your. You're only going to enter the parent information when it specifically says parent. So this wants all of the student demographic information. Next, it'll have email and phone number. Email is really important because that's the way they're going to want to communicate everything, starting from your results, once your FAFSA is processed, and any other information that might come out from student aid. Here, you're going to make sure your address is correct. And then it moves into residency and eligibility. So here, this person, their address was New Hampshire. It's asking, have you lived there for at least 5 years? If you have, then that's all you have to do, and then you answer the citizen question. If you put no, it'll then ask you the date you moved to New Hampshire, just so it is able to capture a residency length if it is shorter than 5 years. Most states usually have an additional residency requirement that you have to complete. So for North Carolina, there's RDS that goes a little bit further to verify residency, but this is a good first pass for all states to get an idea of residency. This next one is the education section. So the first question is probably one of the ones that I see the most errors on. It is, what will be your high school completion status when you begin college? For most students, this is going to be high school diploma. We get a lot of unknowns. I'm not sure if that's just because people are scrolling while that box is active and it makes it to the last choice, but it's either going to be high school diploma or GED in most cases. What college or certificate? So this would be their first bachelor's degree or associates in most cases. And then will you have your first bachelor's degree before you begin the 23-24 school year? You really want to make sure that you put no for this, because otherwise you're going to count yourself out for certain federal funding if you truly don't have your first bachelor's degree. The next one, never attended college or have attended college first year will usually be the option for first year students, but there is a list that determines grade level within there. So again, most of the time you're still going to do first year, even if you have transfer credits, because the school will then make adjustments on their side should you be bumped up to the next grade level. The final question, are you interested in being considered for work study? My best advice to students is to indicate yes, even if they're not sure if they're going to have a job on campus, because sometimes schools use this to determine who they market work study to, but it doesn't tie them to actually having a job. This next part asks for student driver's license. You can see here it says if you have one, it is not required. So if a student does not have a driver's license, they don't have to be discouraged, as it's not a mandatory data element. So here's rounding out our student demographics section about student foster care and parent education completion. The first question, if you are a foster youth or in the foster care system, so you have the ability to select yes or no. And then at the bottom, it wants to know the highest level of school completed by the parents. So this right here also does have an unknown option, as there may be some cases where the student might not know. However, this is really important to make sure you do complete, because you could be considered for first generation college student scholarship opportunities if you didn't have any parents go to college yet. So it's just really important to make sure this isn't left out, as that could be a really big benefit to you. So you can see at the top, it's got a bar, so it's kind of tracking where we're at. So right now we're in section 2, which is school selection. You're going to here enter the high school. So you do have to select the state, and then you can put either the city or the high school name or both. It's going to pull up a list. So depending on if you put the exact name or if you just put the city, you're going to use the little bar and select your high school and then click continue. And then it's going to want to confirm that's the right school. This next section is where you're going to add the colleges that you want to send the FAFSA to. So you have two ways you can add schools. The one that's active right now is where you search by location or school name. So if you know that it's in North Carolina and maybe that it's in Raleigh, but you can't remember the name, you could leave school name blank and hit search, and it'll give you all the schools that are in Raleigh, North Carolina. Or you can also enter the school name if you know it. When you hit search, it'll give a list of all the schools based on what you put. I'm gonna go back because I want to show you the second tab right here that says search by school code. So if you happen to know the school's code, you're able to go ahead and enter that without having to do a search. So if you know the school code, so Wake Forest is 002978, you could go ahead and enter that and not have to type in a bunch of information to add the school on there. So you've got either way you can add. Once you see the school you want to select, you go ahead and click the box. And this next page, you're going to have to select the housing info. So you have to select either on campus, off campus, or with parent. And this is one data element that schools do look at to help try to determine your initial cost of attendance budget, but it's not something that has to be locked in, locked in. If you're not sure if you're going to live with parents or off campus, that's fine. And then you do have the ability also to reorder the schools, where you can see the number 1 off to the left-hand side. However, the schools can only see their school listed. So for example, if you put that maybe you're sending it to both UNC Chapel Hill and NC State, they're not going to know where else you're sending it to. So you can be rest assured that if you've got competitor schools, let's say, they're not going to know who you're sending it to. That's really just for you. So you have to send the FAFSA to at least one school to submit it, and you can select up to 10 at a time. If you have 12 schools you want to send it to, you have to pick 10, go through the FAFSA and submit, and then you can make a correction to change out 2 of the schools. But you can only submit up to 10 at one time. So you're moving into section 3, which is dependency status. Again, we're still asking about the student. What is your marital status as of today? For this presentation, they're single. Does the student have dependents? So this is asking for the academic period between July 1st, 23 and June 30th, 24. Are there children that they have that will receive more than half their support from you? Again, the student will answer this. However, however it sits with them. For this example, we're going to say no. The second one is also if there's dependents other than children who you support more than 50%. Again, for this presentation, the answer is no, but there are certainly cases where they could be yes for one or both of these. Here are the final dependency questions. So far you've seen, are you married? Do you have any dependents or kids? Those are two things that could make somebody independent status. And here are the other ones. If they're serving in active duty, if they're a veteran, if both of their parents were deceased, meaning they maybe were in foster care or a dependent of the ward of the court, emancipated minor, or if you're in a legal guardianship. So these are the other potential ways that you could automatically be considered independent by the FAFSA. If none of these apply, then you would click none of the above. And now we have our student homeless filter question. Yes or no? If you do answer yes, there could be additional documentation that you have to provide, but it's definitely something that schools are willing to help students with. And I also recommend going to your high school counselor if you're in that situation, because I know they're always willing to help as well. So for this student, we're going to say no. So here's kind of our determination for dependency status. It's saying based on how we answered all these questions, we are a dependent student. This means we have to provide parental information to be considered for the full amount of federal aid. So the majority of students will provide information about their parents. If you are unable to provide, then we will talk about that later in the special circumstances, what impact that'll have. But for this circumstance, we are going to select I will provide information about my parent. Now, whose information should I provide? That's always the golden question, and it can definitely get tricky. So as Kathy mentioned, there is a handout that can help guide you to which parent information you provide. So hopefully you'll find that resource helpful. It is very similar to the text in here, but it's nice to have a reference ahead of time before you're in there so you know what you need. As you can see, we've moved into the parent demographic section, and you'll start to see now the questions do refer to the parents. Even though it has your, it does have the qualifier parents. So you're going to select the marital status and indicate the date that they were married or remarried. There's also never married, unmarried, divorced, separated. So there's many options for that view. For this student, they were either married or remarried in 1994. Now we're going to move on to the personal information for the first parent. As you can see, it's going to ask for a lot of the same information that it asked from the student: their social security number, last name, first initial, date of birth, and email. And here's where it's going to ask for other parent. The reason it's asking for other parent, if you remember 2 screens back, we indicated that the parents were married or remarried. If we had indicated unmarried, we would have only been asked for one parent information. Similarly to the student, it wants to know the parent's state of legal residence and have they lived there for at least 5 years. Same thing with the student. If they were to put no, it would ask when did they move to New Hampshire to get a window on how long they've lived there for residency. So now it's kind of wanting to know household size information. So how many dependent children do your parents have that will rely on more than half of their support other than you? So this student has one other sibling in that category. How many other dependents that are not children that receive more than 50%? So this family has one. It could be a grandparent, it could be an aunt or uncle. Those are the most common ones we see. That could be an other dependent. So they've got 2 parents, the student, a sibling, and another dependent, which makes a household size of 5. And then it asks for number in college. So out of the 3 dependents, how many will be in college during that next academic year? So they only going to be them, the student. You can see in bold here that parents are not included in the number in college, but if any of the other siblings or dependents of the parents were in college, they could be included. So the maximum that could be in college would be 3 in this family unit. Moving right along, we're down to parent financials in section 5. So here it's going to start asking about some tax information. If you've completed your taxes, what type of form you completed, and your filing status. So here's where it's really handy to at least know or try to remember how you filed your taxes or have the tax return available. There is an option to link to the IRS, which is a very helpful tool that can transfer some of the data from your tax return to the FAFSA to cut down on errors and to help speed up the process. It is recommended to use this if you have the ability to. There are some times that parents might not be eligible, which is fine. And there's a way to manually enter the information. So if you are going to transfer, you're then going to pick which parent in this scenario, since there are 2 parents completing that were listed on the FAFSA. But so we can show you the whole process. We're going to actually skip data retrieval and just show you all the boxes. So it would autofill some of these. So the first thing it wants to know was adjusted gross income. The FAFSA has gotten really good about making sure it's clear what information it's asking about. So if you're not able to use data retrieval, you can see right underneath that question, it says this amount is found on IRS Form 1040, line 11. It's very clear. It's not, you don't have to guess which number it's asking for. So that's really helpful tool. You'll see that throughout this whole income section. So now it wants to know the working wages. So this is usually found on the W-2. It does want to know split out from parent 1 and parent 2. So whereas you can use line 1 of your tax return for the wages, you have to know the split from parent 1, parent 2 when there are 2 parents. So you are going to have the W-2s to parse that out beyond the tax return. This is not something that carries over from the IRS. This has to be manually entered, even if you do link. So here's something that could happen. You could be asked if you filed a Schedule 1, and if you did not file a Schedule 1, it could let you skip remaining questions. If it offers for you to skip remaining questions, you can always say yes for no penalty. There's logic built in that says we don't need any more information to determine what the family is able to contribute. So you never have to feel like you have to answer additional questions. You can click yes. However, like I mentioned before, I kind of want to show you all the questions that could be asked. So we're going to pick no for this family, even though, again, if you're offered to skip questions, feel free to say yes. So then it wants to know the parent income tax. Again, it's got exactly which line of the form to look for. And then some additional questions. So these could be untaxed portions of distribution, IRA deductions, and self-employment, SEPs, taxes of interest income. Again, a lot of these have exactly where to find them on your tax return. So that makes it really easy to complete this part. You really do want to make sure that, especially the untaxed income part, isn't left out, since that does have an impact on the financial aid. Additional parent information. These could all be 0. They could be numbers, but they do have to have a number in them. So if they don't apply, they can be 0, but you do have to go through these and see if they apply. Make sure that if you have child support in your family, there is a child support that was paid and a child support received. So just make sure you're paying attention to the words and don't get it flip-flopped. But these are some additional income that you could have. And here's additional untaxed income. So this goes into a little more detail. So child support received, housing and food allowance for military or clergy, payments to tax-deferred pensions, veterans non-education benefits, and other untaxed income, such as workers' comp. So just make sure that you're paying attention to those questions as well. Those that are not pulled over from the DRT. So you will have to go in and know what those numbers are, probably on some other tax forms that you received. So we're getting close to the end of the parent asset, to the parent financials, and we're at the parent assets. Again, at the top question, do you want to skip questions? We've been offered yes, so you could definitely skip and not be penalized. However, I do want to show you the questions that they could ask. So they might ask for the current balance of cash savings checkings, net worth of investments, and current business or investment farms. So again, if you're presented to skip, you could say yes at no penalty. Otherwise, you do have to provide the figures. And if any of these were zero, you do also have to enter zero. They cannot be blank. So section 6 now, student financials. It looks very similar to the parent section. There's really not a whole lot different. So it's going to ask, have you completed your tax return? Which kind of tax return? And your filing status. So before I mentioned that if you were an independent student, the process would look a little bit different. Basically, you would just take out the parent section that we just had, the parent demographics and parent financials, and you would go straight from dependency status section to the student financials. But it would be asking the same information. You'd have the option to link to the IRS potentially. And again, we're going to say no thanks because we want to see all the questions. So again, adjusted gross income, student income from work. A lot of times students might not file their taxes. They might still be on their parents' taxes. So a lot of times we'll see that they're not required to file and that they do not have adjusted gross income, but maybe they earned a couple thousand working throughout the year, and that's fine. You can have wages without having filed a tax return. Income tax. Again, it's got 1040 line 22 minus Schedule 2 line 2 if you had any. It's got our additional income items that it wants to know. Most of them are located on a tax return. Combat pay, education credits, child support you paid, earning under a cooperative education program, taxable earnings from a need-based student employment program such as work studies. So that might be one that you maybe don't have your first year, but if you have a work study job, maybe the second year, that is going to be filled out. And then we've got our untaxed income, same as the parents section. Again, for most students, I feel that these are zeros, but there are definitely cases where they might have actual other numbers in there, but you do have to go through each one and verify. Student assets, again, we were given permission to skip, so you could skip or you could answer these questions. There's no penalty to skip them. All right, so we're towards the end. We can sign and submit, but we're not done yet because it wants to review the information one more time. So you get one chance to kind of see everything at a full glance, everything you put, and then you get a chance to go back and edit it. So this shows us everything we selected school-wise, our high school, the colleges we want to send it to, our dependency status questions, our parent info, our student financials. And here's the demographic survey that I mentioned is new this year. So this is just some information it's gathering. It does not affect aid eligibility. And you have the option to decline to answer. So don't feel that you have to answer it, but if you want to provide that demographic information, you can. And then you have the terms to review. Like any terms, I always encourage everyone to read through them. It's really tempting after, spending 45 minutes doing an application to just click submit and continue and I attest, but just make sure you're reading through everything as you go through the process. And then we have to sign it. So you can see here the options to sign the FAFSA. We have sign electronically with my FSA ID. We have to print a signature page or to submit without signature. You can see here, you need the student to sign it and one parent has to sign it. The most preferable way to sign it is with your FSA ID, which you would just log in by putting your username and password. However, in a circumstance where a parent does not have a social security number and you've entered all zeros earlier in the FAFSA, you do have to print the signature page and mail it in after you've already submitted the FAFSA. So that way it can link up to the FAFSA when they receive it in the mail. So again, we do recommend the electronic, but there are cases where you might not be able to. So again, the parent is going to have to read through the terms and agree. So you can see here, if you chose to sign with the FSA ID, you would enter the username and password. Or on the left side, you see at the bottom, print a signature page, and then that can be mailed in to FAFSA. So we're going to pretend like both of those do not have the little caution sign, and it says sign signed by student and parent. And when you click that bottom blue button, submit my FAFSA form now, going to then get a congratulations email because you've submitted your FAFSA. And that's the biggest first step in this whole process. So if you submit the FAFSA and it's signed, you may have on this page a preview of what aid to expect at the federal level. You may have listed a Pell Grant or federal loans, but this is where it just shows you that you have actually submitted it and it's headed to them for review. Next, we're going to talk briefly about the student aid report. So once you submit the FAFSA, it goes to the central processing system. And then once they give their stamp of approval, the school is sent a report, and then the families, the student is sent a report, which is going to be the student aid report. So this is where you can log back into the FAFSA and view your student aid report. It's going to go over your expected family contribution, your EFC, your answers that you had to the FAFSA, and financial aid history. We're going to go through and navigate down that left column of menu to show you what you'd expect from each of those menu items. So the processing results, you can see when it was, when they received it and when they processed it. Can take a few days to process. And then it'll have your expected family contribution on there. You can see right here for this family, it says based on the information we have on record for you, your expected family contribution is 0. You may be eligible for a Pell Grant. And then it tells you in the next paragraph of up to this amount. So you kind of got a little bit of window in to know what to expect for federal Pell. The next one is FAFSA data. So this is going to look very similar to that summary we saw. It's going to go through and have all the information listed out. This is a good thing just to double check again, just since the first time when you looked at your summary, you had probably already been looking at the computer for a while and your eyes might have not picked up on a mistake. But if you review this FAFSA data, if you find anything that was wrong, I'll go over in a minute how to make corrections. But again, this has everything that we submitted before down to the signature. So this example was an independent student because it only had the student on there. The next one is school information. So it tells us what schools we want to send it to. Financial aid history. So this will show in here where you stand with your loan balances and Pell. And Perkins, if you had any Perkins, which is not going to be for any new students, but if there were any older ones. And then this last one is corrections history, which we're going to go through, but you would see here a list of different transactions if you had submitted more than one transaction so far. So you can see here, this is where when you looked at your FAFSA data, if you thought, man, I know I only sent it to that one school, but I'm really thinking I want to send it to these other 2 schools, you can use this page to start correction by just clicking on that button underneath View SAR, and it'll take you right into making your correction. So for the corrections, when you log back into the FAFSA, here's what it looks like. You've got the options at the bottom, some of the most popular things you have to add or change schools or to make corrections. So you can pick, whichever one. If you have something more than a school, you can do make corrections. You do have to create another save key because you're starting a new transaction. So this will be what you use to log back in until you've submitted it all the way through. And then you get to here where it gives you a menu of which section you want to correct. So if you want to, maybe you moved and you need to update your address, you could go into that student demographics section and update your mailing address. And then you decide you want to add another school. So you go to section 2, school selection, and you could add the other school. What's really important when you make corrections is it pops you back into the application at that section. So school selection is under section 2. You're going to have to click through all the way to the end and sign it and submit it to make sure your correction goes through. So don't go in and add the school and then back out of FAFSA. Make sure you click through all the way to the end, sign and submit, and resubmit the FAFSA to make sure the school gets the updated change. Finally, we're going to talk a little bit about special circumstances and what that looks like. So if you remember, we had this dependency student status page where when we did the example, we put we're going to provide information about parents, and then there is also the option that you're unable to provide information about your parents. The Department of Education assumes that parents will help their kids complete school, and they have that responsibility to help pay for school. So it is the expectation that they provide information. However, we know that there are cases where that's not possible. And there may be cases where the student doesn't fall cleanly into one of those dependency questions that they can mark yes to. For example, there could be a case where they are not in contact, with either of their biological parents, and there's a family member that has care of them, but there's no legal guardianship. So that's a circumstance that could be I'm unable to provide information about my parents. There could be maybe they know where their parents are, but maybe they've been victims of abuse. And we don't expect students to then contact their parents in that scenario. So there are cases where this is important for them to select this. If students do select they're not providing parent information and they don't have a reason to do a dependency override, which I'll go over on the next page, they could be limited to the type of federal funding they're eligible to receive, which is listed out on here. So it's really important, no matter what the reason is for not providing parent information, that the student follows up directly with the schools they've sent their FAFSA to figure out next steps. Whether that's saying, my family just said they're not going to contribute, and maybe they're only going to be eligible for unsubsidized loans, or if it's reaching out to the financial aid office to try to explain your special circumstance, and they can help guide you through the next steps of that process. It could be receiving additional documentation from school counselors or someone in the community to help validate the situation. But you can see here the special circumstances would not be considered special circumstance if they just didn't live with their parents. We know a lot of times students, once they graduate high school, they are providing for themselves financially, but for federal funding, that does not rise to the level of special circumstance. Again, the schools are really here to help students kind of navigate that. So if you're not sure, feel free to reach out to the schools you're applying to determine your next steps. And that's all I have.
Thanks so much, Lauren. That was super helpful. We got lots of great questions coming in the chat or in the question box. So really appreciate the folks that are kind of answering questions behind the scenes. One of the things that I thought might be helpful to touch on super quickly is the idea of first come, first serve financial aid.
Yeah, so it's really important when going through the financial aid process, you're paying attention to all deadlines. So you want to look at every school you're applying to deadlines to determine what that means for you at that school. I could probably bet $20 easily that every school is going to be different. I mean, maybe if you apply to like 100, there might be 2 that are the same dates, but otherwise they're all going to be different. So it's really important that you're looking at not just admissions deadlines, but the different financial aid deadlines that match up. For example, we'll say at Wake Forest, you can apply for any decision status right now: early decision, early action, regular decision. But to be considered for merit aid, you have to submit by November 15th. So you could be just submitting for a later decision for admissions, but it has to be by a certain date for this extra pot of money. So it's just really important to make sure that you're paying attention to all the deadlines and you get your application in as soon as possible once you've identified the schools you want to attend.
Great. Thanks for clarifying that. A lot of folks may hear us talk early and often about FAFSA this time of year, and this is why, because, some aid does run out. And so you want to make sure you are being considered for all the aid that you qualify for. So early is always better than late. It's true for a lot of things. It's definitely true for the FAFSA. Um, Okay, so with regards to folks, feel free to keep entering your questions in the question box. Folks are continuing to answer those questions behind the scenes, but I do also want to make sure I give you some information on where to go for more help. And the great thing is the CFNC website is a wonderful resource that you can go to. On the CFNC website, if you go into the pay section of the website, you will see this financial aid map. And what it tells you is, let's say your student is planning to go all the way on the other side of the state. They don't have to drive all the way over there to get help. They can go on this map, look for the college or university that's closest to them. If you hover over any one of those little bubbles, it'll pop up with the name of the college or the university, the person to contact, email, etc. So you don't have, again, you don't have to drive all the way across the state. You can just go to the local college or university near you to get your financial aid questions answered. So take advantage of that. Second, I always love to send folks or remind folks that the federal student aid website, which is the one that controls FAFSA, also has some resources that you can reach out to. They have a live chat, they have an 800 number, and they have email available. So if you have a picky question that you're just kind of stuck in on, or in particular, if you have parents or family members where English is not their primary language and they would like to have it translated into their primary language, whether that's Haitian Creole or Portuguese or whatever, they have folks who can translate there and they can talk to somebody in their native language. Next up, we do also have an upcoming event I want to make sure to tell you all about. Our Spanish services team for CFNC is having an event next Thursday, also virtual from 6 to 7 p.m. You can go on the cfnc.org website, and this is specifically for our Spanish-speaking families. So everything will be in your native language, and that way you can get all kinds of great questions answered from them on both FAFSA and RDS. So if you aren't already registered for that, I encourage you to do so. And finally, I encourage you to go to, again, on the CFNC website in the pay section, there's lots of great resources. In particular, if you go to the FAFSA assistance page and scroll down to the bottom, you'll see all of these thumbnails of FAFSA video resources that get into specific topics. So you'll remember Lauren was talking about how to create your FSA ID. If you're confused by that or you want to review it, they have a video there that you can link to. And so with that, we'll stay on for a couple more minutes. So if you have questions coming through, feel free to do so. But in the meantime, thank you, Lauren, for making what can feel sometimes like an overwhelming form more accessible. We really appreciate your help in doing that. I know sometimes students and families can get a little bit nervous about filling out the FAFSA, and it feels like a lot. And yet I've had school counselors actually time their families. It takes about 20 to 30 minutes to complete it if you have all your materials ready to go. But it's a small amount of time investment for access to financial aid at the federal, state, and at the college level. So it's really worth the time to do that. So Lauren, thank you for your time. We appreciate that. And I also want to extend a big thanks to all of our folks working behind the scenes, Holly, Maggie, Juana, April, and Catherine, for answering all of your questions. And for those of you who don't have any more questions that you need asked, thanks for joining us today. We're thrilled that we were able to bring this to you, and have a wonderful evening.